Hi, folks. It's Nate Piekos of Blambot, and welcome to Lettering Live. Today I have an interview for you. So, back in October, my friend and amazing editor, Shelly Bond, interviewed me on Zoom for a class that she teaches on comics. And she's graciously given me permission to share this interview with you. Um, in case you didn't know, Shelly is one of the best editors ever in comics. She worked for 20 years at Vertigo for DC, working on books like Sandman and The Invisibles and iZombie and Shade the Changing Man and Heavy Liquid. I mean, the list goes on and on. Just an incredible body of work. And actually, recently, she published my favorite book on comic book editing ever. Go get this, Filth and Grammar. It's good stuff. All right. Without further ado, let's get to the interview. Thanks.
Nate, thank you so much for joining my class today.
Oh, of course, anytime.
Here we go. What is the first comic book that made you love the art form?
Probably the black and white Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the originals. I had a family friend on a trip um, give me the original first printing of Ninja Turtles #1, and that's what woke me up to, wow, comic books can be like this. And I was hooked from then. As far as lettering goes, probably 80s Uncanny X-Men and Tom Orzechowski's lettering in that. It was the first time I really noticed lettering and um, his precision and creativity, and it made me, from then on, I was looking at lettering critically.
Were you a graphic designer first and then a letterer, or did they go in tandem?
I was a graphic designer first. My father's an architect, and he's a freelance architect. So I grew up literally at his drafting board as a little kid, playing with his Prismacolor markers and his expensive art supplies. And he was sort of my model for being a freelancer. And he had told me early on, when he knew I was going to art school, um, pick some discipline in art that you're going to make money on, something you can make a career with. And I've always loved logo design and graphics and typography and everything like that. So when I went to Rhode Island College, that was my major. So I graduated with a BA in graphic design.
Fine advice from your father, by the way. I received very similar advice from my father. No doubt they're probably of a certain generation. What do you consider your top true lettering crime? Something that you see almost everyone in comics be an offender of?
Probably with an experienced eye, you can tell when lettering is treated as an afterthought in a printed comic. There are a lot of little nitpicky things I could give you, like using the barred eye where it doesn't belong in comics. There are two different eyes in comics, which I'm sure you already know all this. But for those who don't, there is the eye with bars, and there's a slash eye. And the eye with bars is used only for the personal pronoun I, generally. If you go run and pick up your mainstream comics right now that you've got lying around and open them up, now that I've told you that, you'll never be able to unsee it. Most people go through their whole lives and don't realize it. But
yes, and I was curious, when did that rule come into existence? Because when you look at older comics from like the 60s and 70s, it's very inconsistent. I do love the crossbar rule, and I know that it's something that you bring up a lot in your book, and I do think it's a good one to follow. But do you know when it actually became more of a standard?
probably by the late 70s, maybe. I think it originated based on, like a lot of our quote unquote traditions in lettering, based on poor print quality. Because if you were to put the personal pronoun I in a balloon by itself and it's just a slash, there's a really good chance that that's going to get lost when it's printed poorly on substandard newsprint at the time.
Even if it's not fact, it works for me. That is a really good and plausible assessment. One of the things that drives me crazy is when I see a slash I that needs more kerning around the right and left of it. So it needs more space. Sometimes it's so fine and so narrow that it tends to bleed into the letter form it's sitting next to. Is that something that also drives you crazy?
Yeah, kerning drives me crazy in general. I and it may be because I've lived a lifetime kerning fonts, but yeah, I make it a point to thoroughly. Since I started, I have a text document full of kerning pairs, and there's over 15,000 kerning pairs in my document 20 years on. And I check every new font that I make, I check it against those kerning pairs. So it takes days and days to kern a font properly. Even with, there's the advent now of class-based kerning. I won't get into that, but it's still a slow and agonizing process. But once it's done, it's done. And then when you know it's going to show up in print, it's going to look, chef's kiss perfect.
Yes. Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but if you notice that someone has broken into your house and stolen your files with this kerning guide that you speak of, you can definitely send the cops over to my place. I will be that person who wants to get her hands on that to laminate it and then hopefully put it back.
It's really not that complicated. It's literally taking every letter, and it's in paragraphs. It's like A kerned with every other letter, B kerned with every other letter, and on and on and on. And then you've got your numbers, and you've got everything kerned against punctuation, and.
Well, it sounds like a beautiful thing, I must say. I want to do a lightning round with you. So I'm going to read a sentence and just respond with the first thing that comes to your mind, because obviously, you think about numerals and letters 24/7 as a letterer. When you're not playing guitar, I must make sure that the class notices those beautiful guitars behind you. We can only see the tops of them, but so what? I can tell you're a guitar connoisseur. But lightning round, here we go. What is the average time it takes you to letter a 22-page comic book?
Depending on how text heavy the issue is, probably an average about 6 or 7 hours. I think back in the day, DC and Marvel expected you to crank out at least like 12 or 13 pages a day. In my youth, I could letter a whole book in a sitting, but I don't do that anymore. But yeah, it's about 6 hours or so.
And when you were lettering back in the day, quote unquote, were you hand lettering or did you always letter digitally?
No, I came a few years past the standard of hand lettering. So luckily with my college degree in graphic design, I was able to apply a lot of those techniques to the work I was doing in comics. But I basically had to retroactively train myself to hand letter based on observing other people do it and the tools that they were using. And now that's where a lot of my fonts start, little sketches, little ideas, or I'll just mess around, grab a lettering pen and a dip pen and some ink and just start messing around. And then it goes into the digital world after that.
What is the average time it takes for you to prep a book to turn into one of the larger companies that hire you to digitally letter?
It really depends on how I'm pre-pressing the book. There are some publishers who just want flattened TIFFs of everything, the art, the lettering, everything done and finished and turned in that way. Sometimes I'm turning in EPS files of just the lettering, and the publisher's production department will marry the two. I've got it streamlined pretty well. I mean, that's the name of the game in comics, is streamline your workflow, because every hour that you spend chips away at your page rate. But I can pre-press a book now in about an hour, maybe.
That's excellent. These are really good metrics for people that are just learning about comics, who are deciding what area they want to specialize in. And I think a lot of people had no idea that there's the lettering of the page, and then there's also preparing the lettering so that it complements whichever company you're working for, because some companies have different standards and different ways they want you to supply the work. And that is all a part of your page rate.
Pre-press should be a separate charge.
Ah, okay. Educating people at large about the many skills and steps you need to do parts of comics, whether it's editing, lettering, coloring, is the first step in parity and really getting fair rates and respect for everyone on the job. And I still think that that's why I'm here. That's why I'm still making comics. That's why I'm doing it on my terms. And I think you brought up a key word in my class, and the students watching right now are going to know by now. I love to use operative words as shorthand. I'm a cheat sheet kind of person. And you said streamline, and that's one of my favorites. You really do need to streamline everything you do so that you can work smart as you work hard. So thanks for sharing that. What time frame do you think it would take someone to go from good to great? Someone who, like me, who taught herself how to letter and then fortunately picked up your amazing book.
I have a problem with anyone saying they're like good or the best at anything. I feel like that's not only sort of arrogant, but also it's self-limiting as far as if you're saying you're good or the best, then there's not much higher to go from there. You've reached your pinnacle. But I don't think that's the case. Um, I think we're always learning. That tomorrow you're going to be better than you were the day before, and that'll be that way until your last day. So, I mean, to go from not so great to competent would probably take 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
Competent to good, 3 or 4 more years after that. I don't know. It's not something, I mean, I'm sure it's different for everyone too.
Sure.
It's
So
all lettering and design. So if you've got a good base in graphic design, that'll really separate you out from the crowd. If your lettering is graphic design, whether you're trained, educationally or you're just naturally good at graphic design, that's really the name of the game for lettering. And a lot of people don't realize that.
and that's why I invited you into our classroom, because I want people to understand and appreciate and respect the fact that everyone on the team is an artist, including the editor, but it's more about you today. So the letterer is a graphic designer and an artist as well. And I think that's something that's only been brought forward over the past maybe 10 or 15 years. I think there were a lot of people who would think like, oh, let's just get it lettered. It's like, no, let's get it lettered beautifully by someone who understands spatial relationships and kerning and letting and serif versus sans serif. And to me, if there's one thing I want to just stress for the students, and during our lettering section, this is a big one for me, consistency is the name of the game. When you look at balloon tails, they should all be the same width and go to the same point. And when you're setting up your lettering, you pick a font size and you want to be consistent with the leading in between the lines. And so I do show the students things like that, and that is important. And that's a first step, is to understanding how the lettering guides the eye on the page. And that starts with the editor ballooning and the art directing to make sure we go from left to right, down and across and down the page. Okay, back to you. Who is your favorite old school letterer and why?
If I had to just pick two, it would be Tom Moores and Todd Klein. But man, there's so many good ones. Stan Sakai, Janice Chang, John Workman. The list goes on, and all for different reasons. But those are the two who really piqued my interest as a kid. So I'll have to go with Tom Moores and Todd Klein.
They're terrific. I'm going to throw one name in because there's one that captured my heart, and I had the pleasure of working with him on a daily basis for my early years at Vertigo, John Costanza.
Oh, yeah.
I loved John's just traditional lettering. He did Swamp Thing for many years, and it was quite large, and it was often italic. And that's how I started hand lettering, by looking at his work, because I think my handwriting is closer to his than, let's say, Todd's, because Todd's was always so perfect to me. And I couldn't imagine how I could achieve that. But John had a frenetic pace, which I'm convinced was probably because it was often italics when I would work with him on Sandman Mystery Theater. Back to you. Word balloons on covers, cool or dated? Personal preference. What's yours?
My personal preference for balloons on covers is two thumbs up. I love good creative cover blurbs. And I mean, it may seem campy, but they were such a fun hook to, I mean, your cover is your selling point. It's what's out there. It's what people are going to see on the shelves. And sometimes it's not even a whole cover. It's going to be like the top third because you've got other books in front of it, you know, on slightly lower shelves. But cover blurbs are just, I just think they're so much fun.
Agreed. I'm with you. Favorite letter in the alphabet?
Again, I'm going to have to pick two, and for an interesting reason, I think. The letter S and the letter R, capital S and R, because in my years of designing fonts, I've found that the S and the R lend sort of an inordinate amount of character, no pun intended, to a font. Like the S and the R are, once you nail those, everything else seems to fall into place, at least for me when I'm designing an alphabet. So,
I
and
love
they're both
hearing that.
very different.
I have to
Mhm,
say S and G drive me nuts because I think
mhm.
sometimes they close up, not on your fonts, but just
Yeah.
in general. And so, as someone who's always telling editors to print their work and proofread on paper, sometimes that's the thing I'll note most of all is when an S and a G close up and I can't figure out what the word is. Final question, serif or sans serif? Which do you prefer?
Uh,
What's your go-to?
my preference for serif or sans serif is definitely sans serif. Um, I'm all about simplicity, and um, I gravitate as a fan of type. I gravitate towards condensed and sans serif. You'll see a lot of my. It's pretty rare when I design fonts that are have serifs. I'm working on an upcoming Western series, and I'm doing all the design work. So I'm doing credits page, cover drafts, all that stuff. So I'm having to quickly create a little stable of Western inspired fonts,
Nice.
and a lot of it is serif. And so I'm diving back into serifs right now, even though it's not my comfort zone.
I love when people are sort of forced out of their comfort zone. So I'm going to be looking for that title. And finally, where can people find this? Because this is my lettering Bible and they cannot have mine.
Well, thank you. People can find my book if they want a signed copy. You can come to blambot.com and follow the link. I think it's under the merch link for signed copies of the guide.
Excellent. Nate, thank you so much for joining my class today. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure my students have really enjoyed your insight into comic book lettering.
Of course, anytime.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.